Friends, so much has happened in just the last 24 hours. At 7:46 and 43 seconds just last night, local time, 10 miles west of Naples, Italy, a magnitude 4.7 earthquake. This was 3 kilometers down, which is about under 2 miles. The epicenter of the earthquake sat between two towns, Pozzuoli and Quarto, right beside a steaming crater called the Solfatara. It looks like 21 people were hurt as of this morning, and 2 of them seriously hurt. A section of wall came off of a building on Via Pergolesi and landed on parked cars. The port of Pozzuoli closed, which cut the ferries out to the islands of Procida and Ischia. Rail service across the entire Naples network had stopped, and power went out in several neighborhoods. Families slept in their cars. Now, I believe they did that because they were getting ready to evacuate at a moment's notice, and the building structures around them didn't seem too safe at the time. Now, all of those towns and areas sit on top of a volcano called the Campi Flegrei. That's the Italian name for it, and I'm doing my best to pronounce it as I can. The English map says the Phlegrean Fields, which is the same place either way. It's a volcano with towns built inside it. Last night, the strongest earthquake ever recorded there in 40 years of instrument recording. And 9 days before it happened, the same ground had the quietest week of this entire crisis. It looks like Italy has its own version of the USGS. It's called the National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology. Everybody shortens it to the I.N.G.V, and they run the instruments underneath Naples. They publish a bulletin every week for free on a public website. I have happened to have Tuesdays open for a completely different story, and the number that stopped me I saw was the number 10. 10 earthquakes in 7 days, under the whole volcano. The largest one that week was magnitude 0.8. I'm pretty sure nobody on Earth can actually feel a 0.8 earthquake. The week before that was 20 quakes, topping at 1.5. Italian papers were running the story as the shaking dying down to the lowest point of the crisis. But they didn't know what was about to happen, right? 9 days later, a 4.7 quake. I'm going to tell you what that quiet week actually meant, but you need to really understand what happened last night first. So this is pretty spooky. The last time the ground under Pozzuoli did anything close to this was way back, October 4th, 1983. That one measured around 4.0, and it landed in the middle of the 1982 to 1984 crisis, the one that emptied the town completely. Nothing since has ever come near it. The 2 strongest quakes of the current unrest were both 4.6, and both happened just last year in 2025. A 4.7 beats them out. It beats everything all the way back to 1983. And that claim, all the way back to 40 years, is bounded by the instruments. 40 years is how far back the continuous record on this volcano goes. Inside that window, last night topped it all. So here's the count this morning. I'll flag what's still moving, which numbers are still pending. So 21 people injured, 2 of them seriously. That comes from the Italian reporting overnight, and it's a provisional number. I'll come back to it because the way it changed last night is worth its own minute of talking about. So the damage is concentrated in Pozzuoli. Fire crews logged falling plaster, cracked walls, that one wall section on Via Pergolesi that dropped onto vehicles, and a rocky embankment that gave way and crushed cars underneath it. That port closure matters more than it sounds. That's the ferry link out to Procida and Ischia. It's the first week of August, and it's the middle of tourist season, so more people are actually stranded by that one closure than live in that town. A national rail operator and the regional line suspended service across Naples so that crews could walk across the track, and blackouts happened in multiple neighborhoods. And the shaking itself came in a cluster, which is what geologists mean when they say a swarm of earthquakes. It's a run of earthquakes that are close together in time instead of one quake and then aftershocks. I.N.G.V logged 10 of them in the first bulletin, with 4.7 as the biggest. Through the night, dozens more followed, and the largest around 3.8 out of the Gulf of Pozzuoli and roughly 10 p.m. Sorry about that. The good news is that nobody died. In a town this dense, at that depth, that's the number that's most important, and it's the one none of these other videos are leading with. 0 deaths. Okay. 3 kilometers and 1.9 miles. That's the depth of this earthquake. And it's doing more work in the story than the magnitude of the earthquake is. Let me explain that a little more. A commercial jet cruises higher above you than this earthquake was below Pozzuoli. So the energy had almost no distance to spread out in before it hit foundations. Residents kept using the word explosion, and a quake that shallow is what produces that. A bang underneath the floor with almost no roll to it, like you hear described in other earthquakes. So now put that next to the two 4.6s from last year. It's the same volcano and a similar size, and last night did more damage. Part of that is the depth of the quake, and part of it is something else. I'll get to it because it changes how you should read every future quake that happens here. One more piece of precision for you, because I.N.G.V published it, and almost nobody repeated it after they said it. They didn't write 4.7, they wrote 4.7 plus or minus 0.3. That's a margin of error. It's the same idea as a poll that says 40% plus or minus 3. It means the true size sits somewhere between 4.4 and 5.0. And they're telling you honestly that they can't pin it closer than that yet. Okay, 2 words are going to be all over the coverage you see this week. Here's what they mean. So the first one you'll see is caldera. A caldera is what's left after a volcano erupts hard enough to empty itself out and then cave in. It's a wide bowl in the ground rather than a cone on the skyline. And Campi Flegrei is one, about 8 miles across, with Pozzuoli sitting inside it. That's why there's no mountain in any of the footage you'll see. You're looking at the inside of a volcano. Okay, so the second word you'll see all over is Bradyseism, and it means the ground surface is slowly rising and slowly falling. It's slow shaking from the Greek language. Pozzuoli has been doing it since Roman times. There's actually a Roman market building in the town center with holes that are bored into columns by sea clams several feet up, which means that the ground sank until seawater covered them and then came back up. It's that same process, it just took centuries. I'll say the ground is rising from here on out instead of that Greek word, because that's all that is talking about. All right, here's the whole engine in motion as I.N.G.V describes it. There's magma under the Campi Flegrei, but it's really deep. Above it sits rock full of hot water and gas, and when that hot fluid pushes upward, it inflates the rock above it and the ground lifts. The lifting stretches and cracks the brittle rock near the top. Those cracks are the earthquakes, the rise causing the shaking. So right now, the ground is rising 10 millimeters a month, give or take 3. That's about 4/10 of an inch. It's been doing that since early February of this year. That might sound like nothing, just a few inches or a few tenths of an inch, but over a year, it's the height of a stair step. And it's happening under a city of houses that are built assuming that the ground would hold still. The phrase circulating today is that it could blow. So let me put the official position on the screen from the people that have the instruments in the ground. Lucia Pappalardo, a volcanologist to I.N.G.V, said just this morning, there's no signal of magma rising. That's a direct quote from him, and it's a statement about the depth. It means the signals that their instruments are picking up are coming from the hot water and from the gas near the surface. They're not coming from the magma far below it. And just this morning, Andrea Bili, a geologist at Italy's National Research Council, confirmed the official alert level hasn't changed. It's still at yellow. That's phase 2, which the Italians call attention. It's been at yellow since December 2012, and a 4.7 earthquake didn't move it. Now we have to be careful what we take away from that. Yellow doesn't mean that it's safe. Yellow is already elevated. It exists because this volcano is restless and has been for 14 years. Now what yellow means is that the specific things they watch for haven't changed enough for it to go on to orange. These things are public. A continuous hum in the ground instead of separate quakes. It's called tremor. It's what moving magma sounds like on a seismograph. A sharp jump in how fast the ground is rising. A change in what's coming out of the steam vents at the Solfatara and the Pisciarelli, because the gas shifts when the magma gets close. Earthquakes moving downward instead of staying near the surface. That's what we're worried about. None of those have been reported yet. The true version of this is stranger than the eruption version anyway. A city of people is being lifted by hot water right now. Water and gas under pressure in cracks in the ground a mile or so underneath the pavement. That's what's breaking people's walls in their houses. Now the part of this that Pozzuoli remembers without needing anybody to explain it. Between 1982 and 84, the ground here rose 1.8 meters. That's 5.9 feet in 2 years. More than 16,000 earthquakes, the largest around magnitude 4.0. The historic center was evacuated, and more than 30,000 people left their homes. A lot of them never went back. The old quarter, Rione Taira, stayed largely empty for decades. Add to that the crisis before it, 1969 to 72. The total is about 3.5 meters, 11.5 feet. The harbor floor rose so far that boats couldn't even dock. That's the memory the people who ran into the street last night are carrying with them. When somebody from Pozzuoli hears a bang under their floor, they're thinking about 1984 if they remember it and were alive then. And if they weren't, they heard it from people around them. All right, now let's look at just one street. This doesn't stay too abstract for those of us not there. Via Pergolesi in Pozzuoli. It's a section in the front of a building, and it let go and came down onto the cars parked below it. Thankfully, no one was in those cars, but 12 hours earlier, those same spaces were full of people loading up their beach bags, because it's the 31st of July and peak tourist season. Fire crews spent the last night on cracked walls and fallen plaster rather than collapsed buildings, and that difference is what kept the death toll at 0. And then the gathering areas opened. They're marked squares around town where residents are told to go when this happens. Last night, people needed to use them, and then they slept in their cars anyway. Now, I told you I'd come back to that injury number, and this is why. I started writing this project while the reporting said 4 people were injured. An hour on, it was 10, described as light injuries, thankfully, but then by this morning it was 22, and 2 of them were serious. I'm leaving all 3 of those numbers on the screen instead of just showing you the final one. Nobody is lying to anybody. That's just what a casualty count does in the first 6 hours. Hospitals can report at different times. People walk in later, and the early figure is the floor of injuries and casualties, not the estimate. So, what this means is if you're watching any breaking disaster and someone hands you a confident total in hour number 1, treat that number as early, mine included. 21 is where it sits as I'm recording, and it may well be higher by the time you're watching this. Now, back to the 10 earthquakes from last week. What I missed on Tuesday was the second half of that bulletin. The earthquakes dropped off through July, but the rising didn't. Through those quiet weeks, the ground kept lifting at roughly the same 10 millimeters a month it had been doing since February. And then the shaking stopped, and the lifting continued. I.N.G.V has a line they've repeated for 2 years now, and it reads differently this morning. They say, as long as the ground is rising, there will be earthquakes. So a quiet week here can be the system loading without releasing itself. The lifting bends the rock, and the bending has to come out eventually. Now that's my own read on it, not an official finding. I.N.G.V has not published anything connecting the July lull to the size of last night's event. Next week's bulletin shows the aftershocks fading normally and no change in how fast the ground is rising. Then I'm wrong, and I'll say so on camera. It also answers the question I left open earlier. Why last night hit harder than the 2 4.6s we had last year? 3 years of constant small shaking on those buildings, and then a shallow 4.7 landing on walls that were already cracked. The second hit doesn't need to be bigger than that. It only needs to land on something that's already damaged. Now, if you're wondering why any of this is your problem, it's because we have one. Long Valley Caldera, Eastern California, just south of Mono Lake. It's the same kind of feature. It's another collapsed bowl with a town in it. In May 1980, it produced 4 magnitude 6 earthquakes in a single month. And then the floors started swelling upward, just like in Italy, about half an inch a year, on and off ever since. So, in October 2023, a Caltech team led by Zhang published a study in the journal Science Advances. They used thousands of small earthquakes to build a picture of the rock underneath, down to about 6 miles. And their conclusion was, the rising ground and the earthquakes there are driven by water and gas that are squeezed out as the system slowly cools, with the magma about 7.5 miles down, well below the part that's moving. That's the same sentence I.N.G.V is saying about Pozzuoli. 2 of the most hyped volcanoes on Earth, and both are restless, both being lifted by hot water rather than by magma climbing. The difference between them is the people who live there. Roughly 500,000 of them live inside what Italy calls the red zone, the area that would have to be evacuated if this ever went to an eruption. So what do you actually watch this week? It's going to be 3 numbers, and they're all public. Number 1, how fast the ground is rising. And the next I.N.G.V weekly bulletin. It's been 10 millimeters a month since February. It was 30 a month after the earthquakes in February last year. So if it goes back up to 30, that's the change that means something, and it'll be published for free for you. Okay, number 2, and that's where the aftershocks sit. If they stay clustered near the surface around the Solfatara, that's an ordinary sequence that's just winding down. If they start going deeper, though, that's a different conversation. And number 3 is the alert level. Moving from yellow to orange is a decision made by Italy's Civil Protection Department on I.N.G.V's advice, and it gets announced publicly. If it happens, you won't need to wait for me to tell you about it. So that's where it stands today as of I'm filming this on August 1st. And then there's that number from the last minute. 500,000 people inside the red zone of the volcano on yellow alert. Italy has a written national plan for moving them out. It's public. It names the region each town would go to. Thankfully, it's never been used, but that's also the bad side, right? It's not been practiced yet. I've spent this morning reading about it, and there's a problem in it I didn't expect. That's going to be the next video. Everything you see here is sourced in the description for you. That's the I.N.G.V event page, the weekly bulletins, the alert confirmation. If I've gotten something wrong there, please tell me and I will correct it as soon as I can. Okay, so to summarize, we've got 21 people injured, nobody killed, and a town that's been through this before. I'll be watching the bulletin, and I hope you do too.